Welcome to the Art of Semi-Fiction. I am Robynne Miller.
And I'm Jane Daly.
And our topic today for our first podcast here is basically we're going to go through what semi-fiction is. So to start off, I'm going to read a definition, and it is basically partially but not entirely fictional writing of some sort. How's that?
Okay, read that again.
Partially but not entirely fictional writing of some sort. And that seems to be able to be flipping on both sides. So it can be nonfiction that has some fictional writing in it.
Okay.
And it can be fiction that has some nonfiction writing in it. So basically it's a hybrid.
Okay.
Let's call it what it is. It's when you're using truth in fiction and some fiction in your truth.
So you're not creating a new genre.
No. It's been around for a long time, and that's the kind of funny thing about it. It's words that come into the publishing world, and we think it's new, but the reality is semi-fiction has been around for forever. And one of the things that you've heard the term, like when you see a movie or a book and it's based on a true story,
right.
or it's a fictionalized account, or it's memoir is probably the biggest and most popular kind of burst of semi-fiction. But narrative nonfiction, personal narrative, all of those terms basically mean something that is fictionalized or has some fiction techniques involved, nonfiction, or, of course, we're going to talk about this in a later episode, whether there's truth in fiction.
Okay.
Which, of course, there is.
Well, this sounds exciting.
A lot of people get memoir is probably, like I just said, it's probably one of the most it's a popular new genre. It's not that it's a new genre, but it's newly taken off. It's kind of the Amish fiction of the Christian publishing world, especially, but just publishing in general. Because back in the day, if you weren't famous, if you hadn't done something really important like cure cancer, if you weren't a star or something,
walked on the moon.
Yeah, exactly. Then you weren't writing a memoir. Right. It just wasn't.
Well, no, the whole idea was who's going to read that?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the dreaded P word platform.
Oh.
If you're writing a memoir, you should have access to an audience of millions, kind of a thing.
Right. I read Julie Andrews' memoir.
Oh.
I mean, to talk about a platform.
Yes, she might have had a small one, maybe a small one, and that kind of brings up. Back in the day a lot. You're gonna hear that a lot on the podcast
Because we're old.
Because I feel kind of old right at the moment. But there was this kind of misunderstanding of the word memoir versus biography, and so I think it's important to define that as we're talking about.
Well, and also
semi-fiction.
we're talking about narrative nonfiction.
Yes,
which is a little different as well.
Exactly. So we're going to kind of get some of these definitions out so that we know what we're talking about. There's a kind of a cool website that's the URL is www.differencebetween.net. So differencebetween.net.
Okay.
And this is the definition between biography, autobiography, and memoir. And this is an important distinction. An autobiography is a biography that someone has written about their own life in a similar manner as a biography. So a biography is someone writing about your life. An autobiography is you writing about your own life. And the rest of the definition says, this may be published while they are still alive or posthumously after the person has died. And again, I laugh at that because after the person has died, not needed. Let's edit that, shall we?
They need a good editor.
They need a good editor.
That would have been...
Because it's redundant.
Goes without saying.
That's what posthumously means.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to have to talk to the people at differencebetween.net. And it goes on to say, a memoir focuses on certain memories, experiences, or particular aspects of someone's life. So the difference, the kind of nuts and bolts of the difference, biography is usually chronological. It tells about a person's life. So you'll move through this is where I was born, in a shack by the river. And you'll talk about childhood and adolescence. You might go into your college years and young adulthood, meeting and marrying a spouse. All of those kind of phases.
All those little details are what we regular people typically want to know about famous people.
Yeah, exactly.
How did they get their start? What propelled them to go from being a sharecropper to being a movie star.
Yeah. And so biographies are still in that, or an autobiography, because if you're writing it about yourself, it's the same thing. It's a chronological account of your life. And that's still, you kind of need to be famous. I don't think anybody cares where I was born. I don't think anybody cares, what my alma mater was.
You mean they don't want to know where I went to elementary school?
I don't know. Well, I do. I mean, I care personally, but the greater world, no. Okay. So biographies are still going to be in the realm of people who've done very interesting things or who are famous for some reason or another.
Right.
Cured cancer, first person to, go on Mount Everest or whatever. But memoir, and a biography should be factual, right? I mean, if it's not factual, then it's really not biography.
And then it's fiction.
It's a story. Yeah, somebody's making. So if I say I was born in somewhere other than the state of California, that's just not true, right? But semi-fiction and memoir are almost, there's several forms, as you've already mentioned. Personal narrative nonfiction, creative nonfiction, they're all part of semi-fiction. They're all the nonfiction side of semi-fiction. Because there's semi-fiction and fiction as well. But memoir is, again, the big, most popular burst in popularity genre at the moment. And memoir it used to need, because it was so closely tied to biography, it used to need to be of a famous person, but it no longer does. Because again, it's just talking about a certain, either a circumstance or a short period of time or a series of events that happen.
Well, what we talk about is an inciting incident. So something, say trauma, that happened to you or to someone, and you write the story about that particular struggle. For instance, I wrote a book about my son's death. So that was the inciting incident. So it's a not true memoir, but it is the story of an incident over the course of a year.
And it can be anything. It could be, like you said, a traumatic event, or it can be, I could write a memoir about the first, my husband's British, and I surprised him on a British TV show and dated him after a year of us kind of back and forthing and visits between America and the UK. I surprised him on a TV show in the UK, and I moved there for 6 months to date him properly. I was done with the long distance thing. I could take that 6 months and have that, and my experience as a redheaded California, girl being in the UK, I could have that be a memoir because it's a finite period of time, and it probably would be really funny because the number of times I put my foot in my mouth, you would not believe in that. I did not think it was possible for one person to make a fool of themselves as much as I did, but it was I learned a lot about the culture. It was a finite period of time. There's an inciting incident. I walked out on stage and surprised him on a TV show. So it has all the makings of a memoir. And of course, there's truth in that, in telling of that story, truth, which is where we get the nonfiction side of it. The fiction side of it is you tell it in a narrative way.
Right, as a story.
Exactly.
You have to move the story.
Exactly. Am I missing any examples? So we've talked about the based on a true story, memoir, like Chicken Soup for the Soul kind of articles, essays. Is there anything, I can't think of anything
we talked about narrative nonfiction, which is kind of the same as memoir.
But it doesn't have to, because the narrative nonfiction can be a shorter form. Usually a memoir is a long form, like a book length kind of form. Narrative nonfiction, you could write an essay for a magazine or something, an anthology or something, right? So you learn something, but you learn something in 5,000 words instead of 55,000 words, kind of thing.
So let me ask you a question as we explore this topic. How important is it for fiction writers to read nonfiction and vice versa?
Good question. Well, just to give a little background, Jane has published 2 books, nonfiction, both memoiristic in nature, about 2 different incidents and time periods in her life. But you are a rare kind of hybrid in that you have one foot firmly planted in nonfiction and one firmly planted in fiction. Most people lean one way or the other.
Correct.
My experience, my writing, has been actually my initial writing. Many of my first books are all straight nonfiction. Then I moved into creative nonfiction, so the narrative side of things. So it's like I think I'm walking slowly into the deep end.
You're going to come over to the dark side
of fiction. Slowly moving in. I want to just facts right there, and facts didn't change. I kind of feel like that's what sort of happened. Creative nonfiction.
Skywalker.
Come to the dark side. Yes, follow the force. So now I do write. I would say my writing now, actually, I am kind of equal, but instead of half in fiction and half in nonfiction, I'm still a third in straight nonfiction, so factual stuff. 1/3 in creative nonfiction, and 1/3 in fiction. So I'm kind of that spread.
You win.
I do, because I have 3. It's kind of like jack of all trades, master of none kind of a situation. But
the question is,
yes.
So if I'm your average nonfiction writer, and I feel like fiction is a bunch of fluff, how important is it for me to get over that and to actually read?
I'm going to say, the short answer for me is it's crucial. And my example that we've talked about this because I've completed a degree that I wanted to complete for a long time. I completed a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction and Fiction. So I'm thrilled with that. But it was really interesting. There's 3 genres that in the program that I went through. There were poetry students, there were creative nonfiction students, and there were fiction students. And it was like you could almost see like this visual little clusters we didn't touch.
Like little silos.
Yes, we didn't. There was
clicks.
And it wasn't because they were great people. They're great people, but it was because everybody sort of felt that their genre was the way to express something, I think, or just their comfort zone. I don't mean to even imply that it was arrogance as much as just your comfort zone. And it was interesting because when you go through any kind of education and they force you to cross-read and cross-pollinate a little bit. I mentioned a book to you. It's by Jesmyn Ward, and it's a memoir that I was assigned to read, but it's in poetry. And I would have thought, what? I would have never in my life thought you could do that. And she's not a Christian author. It's fascinating. It's beautiful. It's lyrical. There is so much emotional import in that and movement in that. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I would have never thought poetry had anything to do with my writing. And of course, nonfiction. Nonfiction, when you write as a fiction author, you learn how to incorporate things that really happen, situations that you've existed in, emotions that you felt, things you survived, and you can take all that rich, mine that for good information and put those into your characters and settings in fiction. I think it makes your writing richer. And again, if you are used to writing just straight, I was born on a Tuesday and I went to school here, that's kind of dry. If you learn from fiction how to create the artistry of showing through dialogue and through scene and description, that just brings all the truth that you want to write about to life. So by the end of the program, these 3 little, I'm not touching you, I'm not talking to you kind of groups, were just this one amorphous clump of appreciating the value that each genre had to offer the genre they chose to write in. So,
well, I know that before I started writing nonfiction, I rarely read nonfiction because it seemed like the nonfiction that was out there was very much of here's 5 ways that you can overcome an eating disorder, or the 3 steps to financial freedom. And I didn't see the value in that. But so I did a lot of research.
You're a rule breaker, aren't you? That's why you
yes.
just don't want to. You don't want to follow.
I don't want
You want
to
follow the plan.
So the first book that I wrote could have been the 5 ways to deal with your son's death.
Yeah,
how to deal with grief.
Exactly.
And it wasn't that way. I had to take those fiction principles and move them into make it work.
Yeah.
So I did have to read nonfiction, and now I actually enjoy nonfiction.
And I think that what you just said is part of why we're both connected to it, because we want to explore real things We want to talk about real events, but that whole kind of shift in readership, and we've talked about this before, how Facebook and our culture and all the things that are kind of going on in our world have made us really disconnected, where we see everybody's got great meals and great kids and going on great vacations and doing Instagram photos of it. We don't see any of the, meat. And Simon, what is his last name? Sinek. Thank you.
Sinek.
Love him. Love some of the things that he talks about in the digital age. How we are so focused here that we're losing our ability to be relational here. So it's interesting that writing in general is becoming more relational. So we're not wanting somebody to come and say, I'm going to look down at you and tell you how you can sort out your life.
Right. Here's how you do it.
Yeah.
Here's how I did it. And I'm going to tell you how you can do it too.
Exactly. So we're seeing in nonfiction, we're seeing a relational thing happening, saying, I walked where you walked. Come. Come, let me make you some tea and let's walk through this together. Yeah. That relational thing happens when you have character development, when you see language in dialogue that, we're getting to know the cadence of the person and whatever. But we're also seeing it in fiction. So we're seeing fiction that has a moral, not a moral just meaning, you learn how to do the right thing kind of moral. But there's more meat in some fiction now. We're seeing a lot of, even in contemporary fiction, there's something we're learning about ourselves.
Well, there's a journey. I like chick lit, and don't judge me.
I do a little.
But I do. And so you would think, well, that's just fluff. That's just fluff. But what I'm seeing as I read a lot of British chick lit. Okay,
there's name. You're redeeming yourself slightly.
Okay.
Only slightly. Ever so slightly.
That the main character has a journey that starts here and she ends up here and she learns something. Yeah. So that's kind of a nonfiction principle. What was the character development that took her from I'm selfish, narcissistic, maybe,
whatever,
to I'm now a loving human being with a relationship with a man.
Exactly.
Because that's basically what chick lit is
about. Well, you're stretching the literary value of chick lit. But I think that even that is true though. If we're seeing that in what kind of is bubblegum fiction in some ways, basically meant to be mostly entertainment, what is the other literary fiction that is being written? What is the other? There's a lot of richness that's happening. We can learn a lot by reading fiction. We don't just have to be entertained by it. It can actually have some import. And when we tap into truth, the truth of the human experience, the truth of our emotions, the truth of our struggle, we're going to have better fiction. We're going to have a richer experience in that entertaining thing that fiction is. And if we can warm up nonfiction so that when we're talking about these issues, we're talking about things that
we're telling a story.
Yes.
We're bringing someone alongside rather than just telling them, here's your list of things to do to get out of the situation that you happen to be in.
Yeah.
But instead using those fiction storytelling techniques.
Exactly. And I think that the ethics of memoir, because it's become so popular that I think there are people who are maybe not being as truthful in calling it nonfiction when it's fiction kind of thing. There was an incident now in 2005 or 2006. You remember Oprah Winfrey had her book club, and one of the writers on it, which I'm taking a personal stand in saying I'm not going to give his name or the book name because I don't want him having more sales.
And I won't either, even though I know what she's talking about. Yes, I read the book.
Well, the person wrote a book, presented it as a memoir, and it was exaggerated, I think is the nicest way that we can say it. And the result was Oprah had pitched it as a memoir and found out that it was, in fact, not, large parts of it were not true. And the result was that she felt like she had duped millions, had millions of books were sold to this guy, and he said, well, I just have some personal issues.
Stuff up.
Yeah, and it's like, so.
But then on the other hand, you've got someone like, I can't remember the author who wrote The Glass Castle, which was an amazing story. of her just way dysfunctional family,
Yeah.
and how she tells a story in such a way that you can see, even though it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending and it doesn't have a moral, it's a really gripping story of
Yeah.
someone's real life.
Yeah.
She holds no bars, or no holds barred.
No, whatever that is. But I think that's one of the things that we want to just kind of, when we're talking about semi-fiction, we're coming at it from the premise. Number one, we're coming at it with we're faith-based writers, so we're coming at we need to have integrity.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be we need to be couching our truth in truth and making sure it is true. And if we're going to call it true, it better be true. But we're also we come from the premise that there's fiction in nonfiction. Mm-hmm. There's nonfiction in fiction. It's not a new term. It's been around for 1,000 years. People just have called it different things. But the reality is, every fiction bit has truth in it. Every nonfiction piece has some fiction in it somewhere. And I think that's the way forward. That's what we're seeing in writing. So now we're going to explore all the different bits. Our tagline is we're going to explore every corner of the written word, and that's where nonfiction is, because I think pretty much every writing is semi-fiction.
Every writing is semi-fiction.
I think that's our statement for today.
Okay.
So, thank you very much for listening to our first podcast. We hope that you will subscribe. We, again, are Robynne Miller.
And Jane Daly.
And we are the Art of Semi-Fiction. And I hope that you will subscribe and enjoy us on the next podcast.
And tell somebody else.
And tell someone else.
Thank you.